Welcome to the podcast about venture capital, where investors and founders alike can learn how VCs make decisions and reach conviction. Your host is Nick Moran, and this is The Full Ratchet.
Welcome back for another edition of Investor Stories. On this special segment, the experts describe the most important lesson that they've learned and how that has changed the way they invest. This is the special segment called Lessons Learned. On today's special segment, we have Erik Torenberg of Village Global. Erik, can you tell us a story highlighting a critical lesson that has changed the way you invest?
It's early to call OnDeck a success case, but I will say that OnDeck has really humbled me as an investor because it broke all the rules of what you're supposed to do as a startup. And so the lesson is, be willing to break the rules, or be willing to at least consider breaking the rules. And so the rules that it broke, for example, was that there was a person with a lot of equity who was part-time, i.e. me, a chairman. There was not a clear business model early on. OnDeck was a community or not a clear venture scale approach. We really didn't have an answer to how we were going to get 100 million in revenue because the founder fellowship alone was never going to do it. And we hadn't thought of expanding to different categories, or we hadn't thought that it was possible. But what an investor could have seen, and some people did, even though a lot of people passed on it, is that the core product, people just loved it. And so you have to sort of squint and even sometimes see things that the founders themselves don't see. And so, learn the rules, but also be courageous enough at times to consider breaking them. And OnDeck was sort of one example that took it home for me.
Great lesson. On this special segment of Investor Stories, we have Pat Gallagher of Tuesday Capital. Pat, can you tell us a story highlighting a critical lesson that has changed the way you invest?
For me, one of the biggest lessons that I have learned is to trust my gut on people and on back channel references on people. I think, you have two sides of it. It's really interesting. We always try to do back channel references when we're investing in companies. And I think sometimes you get references, especially if the employee is leaving a big company, say they're leaving Airbnb or Facebook, or maybe they weren't like the top employee, right? And I would say that doesn't actually is not a strong predictor that they're going to be a good entrepreneur, because sometimes people who work inside these big organizations really aren't made to do that. What they really are made to do is run their own organizations. And it's hard to draw the straight line from like, okay performance inside Facebook to be like, that person's going to be an incredible entrepreneur.
Right.
So I've learned to sort of, maybe tune out some of the noise on that. But on the flip side, we've had a couple situations where references have come back all great, except for maybe one where somebody sort of said, that person may be kind of a bad actor at some level, right? There's just some question marks around some of the ethical things that they may or may not have done. And I think maybe this has only actually happened once and sort of has never happened again. But like, we did not draw the line there, and we actually ended up making the investment and it all fell apart for us. And I think, kind of creating a hard and fast line around sort of anything that you get back from a reference standpoint around sort of the ethics of the team, regardless of how good or interesting the opportunity seems, is something that we learned the hard way.
Wow. On today's special segment, we have Alfred Chuang of Race Capital. Alfred, can you tell us a story highlighting a critical lesson that has changed the way you invest?
I will say I need to be more patient. I would say that's probably, if I look at collectively over my 25 years of investing, I'm too fast to grab the checkbook and write a check in my entire time of doing angel investing. And I would say, if you ask Mark Andreessen, he would say probably the same thing, right? Andy Bachtelsham, some of the best, angels I've worked with and known forever. And they did obviously the most astonishing deal because they were so fast to write a check without a company, without a structure, without nothing. But I think this impatience problem I have had my whole life. I wake up in the morning and always feel that the world's in slow motion, and why we can't run the tape 2 times or 3 times faster. That's always been a problem that I have. So, but investment needs to be crafted, and you do need patience, right? You can move fast, right? But you can't skip any steps in the process, right? So gut is good, but it still has to be validated through your gut, right? So that to me is probably the most important thing that I'm still learning every single day. I have to cool my own jets all the time because of the impatience issue, right? Because impatience also leads to sometimes being too critical. And I would say one trait as my whole CEO-ship for a very long period of time was I was always too critical of my own people, too critical of my own company, too critical of my own technology, right?
And probably yourself.
I'm very critical of myself, super critical. Like I'm like criticize myself to death, right? But sometimes overly done is actually not good either. You know, sometimes people really need some room to breathe and they need to be praised, you know, and don't be so critical. Those are all things I think I'm still learning. I wouldn't say that I have perfected those art yet. You know, I wish my personality is far more patient, you know, but some of that, you know, like I still have to learn.
I think it's one of the biggest challenges of this working environment. You know, my team has described me in the past as being intense. And when they only get, you know, performance driven sort of meetings and stuff and without the in between, it's hard to kind of moderate the performance driven culture with, you know, some easeful human connection.
Yes, absolutely.
On today's special segment, we have Stephen McIntyre of Frontline Ventures. Stephen, can you tell us a story highlighting a critical lesson that has changed the way you invest?
The early part of my venture career is probably unusual in that I've spent nearly as much time fundraising as I have investing. So yeah. one of the lessons, and I hope that will not be the case as my VC career goes on into the future, but a couple of the lessons on fundraising were one, it really is just like enterprise sales, and it's all about qualification. And that's the kind of advice that somebody can easily give you, but actually you don't listen until you felt the pain of it yourself. And I met more than 100 LPs, and I could have saved myself, 70 no's by just doing more work in advance. And that's the kind of thing that we tell our seed entrepreneurs all the time when they're going out to do their fundraising. But I made that mistake myself. And the second thing, just on the fundraising side, was, again, it's the kind of advice that we'd give to our own entrepreneurs. Forget about the slides. They're investing in you. It's about the story. And thankfully, we learned that lesson pretty early on in fundraising. And that those two things kind of changed completely the way that I thought about fundraising.
You know, some LPs are open and public. Some institutions will talk about what they've invested in and, what's in their portfolio. But a lot of LPs are also opaque. So how, when you don't know much about what their strategy is, how do you accomplish pre-qualification?
I found that certainly with institutional investors, and we were lucky in our seed fund to have mostly institutional capital. And so Frontline X, when we went out, even though it was a brand new fund concept and it hadn't been done before, we thought, okay, well, we're just going to go to institutions. And that was only partially right. We did get a couple of large institutions in. About 50% of the capital is institutional. But then we found out that actually for the vast majority of institutions, a brand new fund concept, as novel as it is just sort of not for them. It would be and for most of those institutions, that information was knowable in advance. So, not family offices, I think, are different. Individual investors, of course, you kind of never really know. But for the institutions, I really think that was knowable for us in advance. If we had just looked at the kind of funds they invested in before, and a lot of that information actually was available online. You're right. I think when it comes to family offices, then it's kind of impenetrable. The thing I learned about family offices was that while in principle, they can be very creative, they can invest in anybody, and they can make a decision really fast. In practice, almost none of those things play out because they're very relationship focused, and they need to know you, or they need to get to know you, or they need to be able to reference check you. And as a result, what we found was we had most traction with family offices basically in the UK and Ireland, because people could reference check us very quickly. Whereas in the US, we have an institution from the US, but family offices were less likely to do primary DD, and they would be more likely to do reference checking, which was harder for them to do on us because we were across the Atlantic.
That will conclude this installment of Investor Stories. If you're enjoying the program and would like to see it continue, take a moment and leave a 5-star review in iTunes. Also, if you'd like updates on new content from TFR, as well as the top 10 VC articles every week, go to fullratchet.net and sign up for the newsletter. Okay, that will wrap things up for today. Until next time, over-prepare, choose carefully, and invest confidently. Thanks for joining me.